Hello, I am Woody and welcome to Woody Minis. And have you seen the news? Games Workshop are releasing Marnius Calgar in Terminator armor along with his Victrix on a guard, company standard bearer and company champion. And guess what? I've got one already. Okay, let's take a look. Here is Marnius Calgar, the OG 20 years old metal miniature. And to be honest, my favourite model, absolutely iconic. And here's the standard bearer as well. And this is what they looked like when I first got them. Now I need to fix the company's champion before the new one comes out. This is what we're dealing with today. This guy is about 20 years old and he is covered in just layers and layers of paint. He still looks cool, he's got a really nice pose, he's still got the backpack, all the little pieces. I think there's glue on this joint here where his arm used to go, if I remember correctly. And there's also glue here, because I think this power dagger or ceremonial dagger should be glued on at the wrist as well. So it's going to require quite a bit of work to get him ready for the painting table. Previously, when I was stripping the paint off Marnius Calgar up there, I did it manually with a brush and some paint remover. But after watching eBay mini rescues on YouTube, there's a new trick that I want to try and see if it works, and it involves an ultrasonic cleaner, isopropyl alcohol, and a small glass jar.
To start things off, I set up the ultrasonic cleaner and then proceeded to add the isopropyl alcohol to the glass jar. Then I added the miniature.
And what I'm also going to do, if I can focus my camera, is add a tiny little drop of dish soap into the water, because that will help break up some of the tension and allow the sound waves from the ultrasonic cleaner to travel through the water easier and give it a bit more of that cleaning power that we'll need. And this is probably going to be pretty loud.
Yeah, let's mute that and then skip ahead to the bit where he comes out. After 3 cycles of 30 minutes each, I removed the miniature from the jar and laid it on some paper just so it could dry off. I then proceeded to use nitrile gloves to handle it while removing all of that super glue, which is now turned extra gloopy. It was also time to remove some limbs. I used some fine grip tweezers to remove the rest of the super glue, which wasn't too difficult. I then proceeded to remove the base from the miniature so that I could get into all the nooks and crannies with my next tool, the humble toothpick. This thing is great for scraping off any extra paint to begin with, especially in the thicker areas because it's soft enough that it doesn't damage the metal. Afterwards, you can proceed to scrubbing with a toothbrush and it just makes the whole job a lot easier. I then went back and forth with the toothpick and the toothbrush as well as the tweezers to remove any superglue, thick paint or light bits of paint that were ready to come off.
Okay, he is now fully clean and shiny, and we can take a closer look at some of these details and some of these problems that we're going to need to fix.
We can now take a look at all that glorious hand sculpted detail on the model. He's got so much character to him that I absolutely love. So many rosettes, so many skulls, so many little bits of imperial iconography as well, and it's something that I really don't see that much outside of character models these days. Which I guess this guy is. But the favourite detail I found was this on the shoulder pad. You can see that it's hand carved ultra underneath, and this was hidden under so many layers of paint, and I just can't wait to get round to painting it, although I am kind of apprehensive about it. Seeing this miniature in its pure naked metal form has brought me back 15 years to when I first started collecting Warhammer, and this was the favourite thing I bought with my pocket money. On to the damages. The top of the plume has a little chip, and there are lots of little smooth surfaces at the bottom of his skirt, probably from when they were removing the little nubs from the mould like this. I did end up finding lots more of these for some reason, and ended up removing them with my hobby knife. To get the plume back into shape, I used the back of my craft knife to push the little feathers, push the little bristles back into the right shape. It did take a little bit of effort, and I was kind of worried about it, damaging it more, but it wasn't too bad. I then used a drill bit and gently twisted it around to add the little dimples and give the illusion of some extra texture of the brush bristles pointing up from his plume. The sword did require a bit of straightening out, but that's not too difficult. This pewter is really soft and easily malleable, and just by lining it up with my painting mat and cutting mat, it was easy enough to get it into a straight line. Whilst touching it, I did find some extra nubs that needed to be clipped off, same with the backpack. To attach the arms properly without them falling off, I resorted to pinning. It's a good trick. By drilling holes in either side, inserting a small bit of brass wire, and supergluing it in, I was able to pin it. Whilst I was waiting for the superglue to harden, I then scored different areas on his wrist because this is a bit too thin for me to pin, and the scoring helps build up the superglue bond. I attached it quickly and just pushed it into the right shape, making sure that the arm joint was as seamless as it could be, as I really didn't want to go back in there with green stuff. The backpack, it's just a backpack, I just glued it into place. Nothing fancy to see here, folks.
Alright, and while we are waiting for this guy's superglue to fully cure, we're going to look for a 40mm base because I'm not going to be playing actual Warhammer with him. He's going to be more of a display model for my collection, one that reminds me of childhood playing Warhammer with my younger brothers. So, let's find it.
After a quick scouring in my bits box, I found this 3D printed base which looked sufficiently grand for my model. I picked it off of the supports and then started clipping off the bottom of his base tab. It was simple enough and I did feel a little bit guilty about it, but you know, it's got to happen. The texture and angle of the stones on the base made me a little worried that he wouldn't be able to be glued on properly, so I mixed up a tiny bit of green stuff and applied it to the bottom of his feet to increase the surface area of where he'd be stuck on. It was then on to the painting, my favourite part. I base coated most of his armour with Macragge blue mixed with Abaddon black. I then added some Sotek green from Citadel as a turquoise colour to my palette. I blended it in with the rest of the blue, and this will be for the further highlights on the top parts of the armour that are facing towards the light above. For the final and edge highlights of the armour, I mixed in some white with the turquoise and applied that to all of the edges that are facing directly up, mostly towards the helmet where I want to draw more attention. They were also added to smaller little details like the fingertips gripping the sword blade and the thumb, so that they could call attention to more cooler parts of the model that I really found interesting. And with that, the blue of the armour was done and we could move on to the gold. I started out by mixing some bronze Balthazar gold onto my mixing palette, and then added some lighter, brighter auric gold and blended them together with an old paintbrush. I used this gold for the helmet and the hilt of his sword, as well as some other details on the rest of the model, like his shin pads and the things on his belt. I highlighted the rest of the gold with the brighter parts of the gradient that I'd made, and later on gave it a final highlight just on the edges with some Stormhost silver. All of the white parts of his armour, including all the copious amounts of Ultramarine symbols, were painted grey and then white, with a higher, brighter white at the top to give it a bit more contrast and a bit of depth. After giving my Bugman's brown a very big shake as it had been sitting on the shelf for far too long, it was mixed together with a sandier colour to make a light brown to base coat the plumes. Then, at a later time, I'd be highlighting it with white to keep it a lot of texture and shadows. To keep the dark theme of my miniature, I wanted to use some darker brown for the leather on his belt, and this was just a mix of dried bark and a bit more of that Bugsman's brown concoction I had earlier. I switched to Ironbreaker to do lots of the metal details like the chain and all the rivets on the belt too. I also used it to paint all the swords. I'm afraid I don't have any technique for fancy metallic metal here, but I do have ways of painting bristles, which is just with a little bit of paint and then kind of like dry brushing it. Yeah, it kind of works. To make sure my miniature looked sufficiently fancy, I used the same turquoise as earlier, highlighting it with white to paint in some lightning on the blade. And with just a little bit more stippling on the blade with white, the build was complete and it's time for the grand reveal. And originally for this video I wanted to rescue the Victrix Honor Guard as well, but I didn't have a gun. So yeah, he was missing this and I couldn't find a new one, so instead I've got some Oyumaru which should be arriving shortly, which I can use to fix these two. If you'd like to see them, consider liking and subscribing. Thank you and goodbye.